I've been invited to Zambia to preside over graduation at a university called Eden University. And on the day of my arrival, I was scheduled to pay a courtesy call on President Kenneth Kaunda. And after paying a courtesy call on President Kenneth Kaunda, I was supposed to lay a wreath at the grave of the president. So, and later in the evening, I was to talk about the place of China in Africa. As I arrived, and we were with my wife here, she was ahead. As I arrived, I saw 6 individuals. And I said, this is the reception part. Little did I know, as I approached them, they simply told me, we have received instruction from the highest authority that you are not welcome to Zambia. And I asked, why am I not welcome to Zambia? I've been here before. And they told me, it's a security issue. And I asked, is it my security that is under threat or the security of Zambians? I know subsequently the Zambian vice president was asked and did give a statement in parliament, and she said that it was on security grounds. Pressed further, she said that they have no obligation to divulge. But in fact, I find it laughable and amusing that I can be a threat to security, but I can only speculate is that the subject of the presence of China in Africa is becoming a hot potato. And perhaps I have spoken one time too many about how to relate to China. And I keep on reminding my audience that I never blame the Chinese. Because the Chinese, to their credit, their leadership have defined what they want for their people. And they are going about it. It is our duty to define what we want for our people. And why do I think that this is something that ought to capture our attention? Many East African countries have been importing fish from China. And I'm happy that the Kenyan head of state only 2 days ago banned the importation of fish from China. If we continue to import fish, we continue to import textile material, we continue to export raw goods, the net effect is that our countries will die economically. And there ought to be voices that are speaking about this often. Recently, you know that the Chinese told Africa, and this is part of the problem that we have. When we are dealing with Africa, China is dealing with Africa, it says, we have given Africa 60 billion. But Africa is 55 independent states. When you give them 60 billion, is just about the GDP of Kenya. What can it do in real terms? And when they give 60 billion, what are we going to do with it? And I can therefore, in response, say that I think the Zambians must now recognize that they created a mountain out of a molehill, and that it wasn't necessary. In fact, I've seen quite a number of documentaries now beginning to document other people who had been denied entry into Zambia. And Zambia is a beautiful country, was the cradle of the struggle for independence in Southern Africa during Kenneth Kaunda. It is sad that we are talking about African unity and we are denying Africans entry for no good reason. If I belong to one of these groups, I would myself say, yes, there is a good reason. But I belong to no such group. But in order to give you some of the more practical nuances of this, one of the richest men in Africa is Nigeria's Aliko Dangote. And Aliko Dangote is on record as saying that even such a one as him, who is employing Africans in the thousands, has to grapple with 38 visa applications. 38 visa applications. In fact, Addis Ababa, and the Ethiopians now have, in my view, a prime minister who is beginning to see things in the right direction. And I hope he continues on that trajectory. It is only Kenya and Djibouti that does not need visa into Addis Ababa, which is the headquarters of the African Union. I believe that every country should have free visa entry into Ethiopia. Because as long as we continue to grapple with these visas, these are the tariff and non-tariff barriers that stand in the way of Africa's realization of her potential. Which brings me to the question that you asked, where do we go back? I am of the considered view that Africans in the diaspora are now sufficiently organized to petition the African Union to have observer status at the African Union. If you then gain observer status, these are some of the things that you should use to confront the ambassador of the African Union here. I remember several years ago, an African American lived in Nairobi and I acted for him as a lawyer. He called himself Shaka Zulu Asegai. A very good name, Shaka Zulu Asegai. And he asked for two things. We went to court and applied for two things. At that time, the Kenyan Constitution allowed that if an African man was married to any woman, then she could acquire status. We went to court and said that that was discriminatory and that Shaka Zulu Asegai, being married to a Kenyan woman, should also be entitled. We cited all manner of international instruments on discrimination, and we also applied that Shaka Zulu Asegai should then be given 40 acres of land gratis. Of course, we failed on both accounts. But the beauty of it is that he knew. I told him that we are going nowhere with this application. But sometimes you go to court not to get a judgment in your favor, but you do that in order to give visibility to an issue. Perhaps today that is now becoming an issue that we ought to wrap our minds about. And it's not an idle question. It is very easy to come and say, Africans in the diaspora, come. But where do you come? Do you start with Ghana? Do you start with Rwanda? But under the reforms that are now being undertaken, President Paul Kagame of Rwanda is leading a reform movement of the African Union. These are the issues that ought to be on the table. But you must be organized. Organized, and I believe the organization should be on an economic business front. Why do I think that that is more important? Today, in many African countries, the largest contributor to the GDP is remittance of income. Zimbabwe, for example, has nearly anything between 4 and 5 million Zimbabweans living outside of Zimbabwe. And those are some of their best men and women in terms of qualification. So that if they make demands, Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, all these countries, my own view, therefore, in a short shrift answer to your question is, there is need for organization and collaboration so that we are able to approach the African Union. But this does not take away bilateral petitions and having Africans engage in fora such as this so that we are able to carry this agenda forward. It's not going to be easy. Because why do I say it is not going to be easy? In the last 1 week, I have seen Angola expel 180,000 Congolese. People have lived in the Congo for over 30 years, and they are being expelled and taken and driven into nothingness in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So there are these contradictions, but yet there are others who are welcoming. Rwanda has been very good in that regard. Rwanda allows people, East Africa, within the East African region, to get into Rwanda without work permits. It is also going to be useful to approach Africa through her regional blocks, the SADC bloc. If you go through the SADC bloc, then you are accessing quite a number of countries down there. If you go through the East African bloc, then you are accessing that particular part of Africa. You go through the ECOWAS bloc and you go through the Central African bloc. And I now know that there are people from Africa, from the United States of America, who are entering into commercial arrangements. I believe when that happens, then in the fullness of time, there will be a place to go to. And that place to go to will then make sense. But there is a caveat. In countries such as Liberia, where you have had this dichotomy, and you are aware of it, when the Liberian nation was established, there is still this tension between the so-called Americo-Liberians and the indigents. Those are issues that I believe we can midwife something around them if there is clarity that there is politics that makes people compete in a negative way. And the reason why there is negative competition in Africa about politics is that politics gives individuals who are not interested in the welfare of their country the opportunity to exploit their countries. The day we make sure that politics is an arena of service and does not give one undue advantage, then you will discover that you only want your best men and women to be in the political arena, and that will happen and must happen. I'm not naive to believe that it's going to happen without difficulties. I'm acutely aware that there will always be fifth columnists whose agenda is to destroy that which is good and right. The second thing is about historical black schools. One of the areas in which I think we have been very weak as African institutions, particularly in the education arena, and those of you will follow Africa, in the early 1980s, even when I was a student, there were universities that were famous for many things. Fura Bay in Sierra Leone was famous for engineering. Or the University of Ibadan in Nigeria was famous for engineering and other social activities. Makerere in Uganda was famous for engineering and medicine. What we have done in the recent past is to allow the proliferation of institutions that we refer to as universities, but are essentially glorified high schools. And the net effect is that there is no meaningful research that is taking place in those areas. And I'm answering this question to link it with what my good friends talked about in agriculture. The reason why I think we remain to punch below our weight is because we can't feed ourselves. Why do I say we can't feed ourselves in many areas? You go to many African countries, we are importing chicken from Brazil. We are importing tomato paste from the United States of America. Heinz is to be found on every table in every restaurant across Africa. We are importing milk from Nestle. We are importing water. We say we don't say we import it, but it's made water, drinking water. That's shiny from Coca-Cola. Look at how we export our coffee. Somebody was giving me an analysis which I'd never thought about in the depth that he had done. He told me, you can't roast your coffee. You have your farmer grow this coffee. It is brought to the United States of America. It's roasted in the United States of America. Then look at the chain of employment that Starbucks creates. So that you sell your coffee, say, for $1, but the Starbucks is going to sell a little cup of coffee, say, for $5, just notionally in that way. Look at the chain, what you then produce because of Starbucks. Paper, napkins, and all these. But the African farmer is stuck with coffee in its raw form. Look at tea. Kenyan coffee is some of the best in the world, but we use it, we export it for purpose of blending. And you can go on and on in this area. What I am saying and what I've been saying is that we must do something about our education system. We must undertake research. And if you are not in agribusiness, then you are not in any place. And that is why the Ethiopians are making me happy, in the sense that they are now saying, from the farm to the cup, from the farm to the mug, we are going to deal with it to ensure that we derive benefit. The other thing you talked about, agribusiness, look at the entire textile industry. The East African countries about 2 years ago agreed that they are going to ban the importation of second-hand clothing from the United States of America, which was a beautiful thing. Kenya and Uganda did not follow through, but Rwanda did. And the dividends of that particular policy decision and implementation is, in the next 10 years, you are going to have the entire cotton industry in Rwanda revived. If you go to Nigeria, Nigeria has some of the best dressed men and women in the world. In the world, without doubt. But most of their textile industries in the north are closed. So that what we call the beautiful Nigerian dress is actually from the Netherlands, is from Belgium. Suppose we, Nigeria, want to make a decision that we are going to revive our textile industry. And these things can be done. If little Rwanda can do it, you can imagine 1 in every 5 Africans is a Nigerian. They are some of the best educated men and women in the world, in any field. If the Nigerians were to make a decision that we can no longer just rely on oil, we are going to revamp our agriculture. We are going to produce poultry. We are going to produce in many areas. I can't agree more, but it must happen at universities. The universities must be the locus. It must be the locus of research. And easier said than done, but once again, there is a sense in which the academic must now have a linkage with industry. And I say this because the Nigerian Aliko Dangote, I do not know how many of you have heard or know about Aliko Dangote. Aliko Dangote is an amazing individual, whether you like him or not. What he has succeeded in doing is to control the cement industry, and he is now competing with Lafarge and other companies in the world. I think in West Africa, Aliko Dangote is to be found in every other field. And there are many other African business people. And the politicians are beginning to listen to them. And once the politicians begin to listen to the business people, then they can begin to endow chairs at university so that Howard can have a linkage which is going to be a very practical nature, of a practical nature. And my view is there will be initial baby steps. And we who are the pioneers will not even see the dividends of what is going to happen. But the fact that we have initiated them is, in my view, a very useful thing. The final question in this segment was this old argument, where are you from? There is a sense in which Africa still continues to labor under very primordial instincts, particularly the African politician. He is always under threat. In 1960, and you'll remember this, there was a major debate in Africa about who is an African. And the key debaters at that time were Kwame Nkrumah. It led to get back to what was called the Nkrumahist school as to who is an African. The other big debater was Cheikh Anta Diop of Senegal. And the other more prominent debater was Léopold Sédar Senghor of Senegal. And you remember it gave back to the entire Negritude movement. And the famous statement by Nigerians, Wole Soyinka, that a tiger does not shout about his tigritude. You follow the path of a tiger and you see the skeleton of an antelope and you know that some tigritude has emanated from there. Those were debates. And at that time, they even argued that this idea that in order to be an African you must be dark-skinned is without basis. And he argued that he knows very many dark-skinned individuals who are not Africans. Because in all their ways they are Anglophile or Francophile.